It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when I stumbled upon the truth that would unravel my entire world. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue across the living room where I had just returned from work. I had expected the comforting scent of dinner wafting through the air, the sound of my wife, Laura, humming her favorite tune while preparing our meal. Instead, an unsettling silence greeted me. As I dropped my briefcase by the door, I noticed her phone lying on the coffee table. It was unlocked, a rare occurrence in our tech-savvy lives. Curiosity piqued. I picked it up, intending to send her a quick text to let her know I was home. But what I found instead sent my heart racing and my stomach twisting in knots. A series of messages flashed across the screen. They were between Laura and someone named Jake. The casual tone of their exchanges quickly escalated into something far more intimate. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, each one a dagger to my heart. "I can't wait to feel you again," she wrote. "You make me feel alive," he replied. It became painfully clear that this wasn't just a flirtation, it was an affair. I felt the blood rush from my face, leaving me cold and numb. Disbelief washed over me like a wave, followed by an intense anger that ignited deep within. How could she do this? How could she betray the vows we had made? The memories of our wedding day flooded my mind, her radiant smile, the promises we had shared. It all felt like a cruel joke now. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with my rage, but instead I stood frozen, clutching her phone like a lifeline. My mind raced as I tried to piece together how long this had been going on. The thought of her in the arms of another man, especially one who was an airline pilot, filled me with a conflicting mix of jealousy and fury. He was everything I wasn't: handsome, adventurous, and free. I felt like a caged animal, trapped in a life that was now a lie. The reality of her betrayal settled like a heavy fog in my chest. I dropped the phone back on the table, my hands trembling. I needed to confront her, to demand answers, but part of me hesitated. What would I say? How could I express the whirlwind of emotions without losing control? I had always prided myself on being level-headed, but this was different. This was personal. As I paced the living room, I replayed our last few weeks together in my mind. Had there been signs? The late nights at work, the sudden urge to go out with friends, had they all been part of this deception? I felt like a fool, a blind man stumbling through the darkness, completely unaware of the treachery lurking in the shadows. I glanced at the clock. She would be home any minute, and I had to be ready. I couldn't let her see the turmoil within me just yet. I took a deep breath, attempting to steady my racing heart. This was going to be the hardest conversation of my life, and I had to make it count. With every second that passed, my resolve hardened. I would confront her. I would demand to know the truth, and I would not back down until I had answers. The image of Jake, the pilot, flashed in my mind, and with it came a surge of determination. I wouldn't just sit back and let this happen. No, I would fight for my marriage, even if it meant tearing everything apart first. As the door creaked open and Laura stepped inside, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. She looked up, her smile faltering as she took in my expression. The air was thick with tension, and I knew that the moment of truth was upon us. "Hey, honey," she greeted, her voice light and cheerful, but I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. How would I begin? How could I convey the storm brewing within me? "Laura, we need to talk," I finally managed to say, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. The moment hung in the air, charged with unspoken words and a shared history that was about to be shattered. As I stood there, watching Laura's expression shift from confusion to concern, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum, urging me to speak, to unleash the torrent of emotions that had been building inside me since I discovered her secret. But instead, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. What had gone wrong? Where had we lost our way? I replayed the last few years in my mind, moments that now seemed tainted by betrayal. Our wedding was supposed to be the beginning of forever, yet it felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the reality of her infidelity. I remembered how we used to laugh over dinner, how we would curl up on the couch and binge-watch our favorite shows. Those moments felt so genuine, so real. How was it possible for her to share that intimacy with someone else? I had always believed in the sanctity of our marriage. I had trusted her completely. The thought of her with another man, especially one as dashing as an airline pilot, twisted my gut into knots. I imagined him tall, confident, and charming with a smile that could light up a room. What did he have that I did? My mind raced with insecurities, each one more painful than the last. Was I not enough? Had I failed her in some way? I forced myself to focus on the present. Laura was standing there, her brow furrowed, waiting for me to say something. I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she bit her lip as if bracing for impact. I had to confront her, but how could I do it without losing myself in the process? The anger that bubbled beneath the surface was threatening to erupt, and I fought to keep it contained. Laura, I began, struggling to find the right words. I found your phone. The admission hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I could see the color drain from her face as realization dawned upon her. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. What do you mean? She stammered, feigning innocence, but I could see the panic in her eyes. The facade was crumbling, and I was determined to expose the truth. Don't play games with me, I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I saw the messages. I know about Jake. The name felt foreign on my tongue, a name that now symbolized everything that was wrong in my life. Her reaction was instantaneous. I can explain, she blurted. But I cut her off, the words spilling out before I could stop myself. Explain what? How you've been lying to me, how you've been sleeping with another man. My voice shook with emotion, each accusation fueled by the betrayal that had pierced my heart. Please, just let me talk, she pleaded, her eyes pleading with me to listen. I found myself torn. Part of me wanted to hear her out, to understand her side, but another part of me was consumed by rage. How could I listen to her excuses when my world was crumbling around me? I don't want to hear your excuses, I said, my tone icy. You've shattered my trust. You've shattered everything we built together. For a brief moment, I saw vulnerability in her eyes, a flicker of remorse that made my heart ache. But I quickly pushed that thought aside. I couldn't afford to feel pity for her right now. I needed to stay focused on the betrayal, on the hurt that was coursing through me like poison. I love you, and I thought you loved me too, she said, her voice trembling. This wasn't supposed to happen. Wasn't supposed to happen. I echoed, incredulous. You didn't just stumble into this, Laura. You made a choice. You chose him over me. The words felt like daggers, each one aimed at the very core of our relationship. She opened her mouth to respond, but I could see the fight draining from her. The reality of the situation hung heavy in the air. I felt a mixture of triumph and devastation. I had confronted her, but the weight of her betrayal still loomed large. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice softer now but still laced with pain. I need time to think. As I turned away, the finality of my words echoed in my mind. I was standing at a crossroads, and I had no idea which path to take. The moment felt surreal, like a scene from a movie rather than my own life. I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something. Instead, I felt hollow, as if a part of me had been cleaved away. I knew I had to do something, something drastic. I couldn't just let this go. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the image of Jake from my mind. I had to find out who he was, what he meant to Laura, and ultimately I had to make him pay for the pain he had caused. The air was thick with tension as I stepped into the kitchen, leaving Laura standing in the living room. I could hear her footsteps behind me, hesitant and uncertain. I felt a pit in my stomach, a churning mix of anger and heartbreak. I had confronted her, but the battle was far from over. I needed clarity, and most importantly, I needed answers. Where did it all go wrong, Laura? I asked, my voice steady yet strained. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms defensively. How could you do this to us? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a mistake. A mistake? I echoed incredulously. You call sleeping with another man a mistake? This isn't just a slip-up, it's a betrayal. My voice rose, fueled by the hurt that coursed through me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to tumble into the abyss of despair if I didn't get the answers I needed. I was lonely, she admitted, her voice shaking. You were always working late, and I felt neglected. Jake, he was there for me when you were. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. You were lonely, I repeated, disbelief flooding my mind. And that justifies cheating on me. It wasn't just about that. She insisted, her frustration spilling over. We were drifting apart. I thought we could fix it, but then Jake came along and I don't know, it just happened. I didn't want to hurt you. I felt the sting of her words, the truth buried within them. We had been distant lately, but I had never imagined she would seek comfort in another man's arms. You didn't want to hurt me, I scoffed, incredulous. You've already done that. You've destroyed everything we built together. Tears welled in her eyes, and I could see the anguish etched across her face. I'm so sorry, she pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. I never wanted to hurt you. Love you and I want to fix this. Please just give me a chance. I shook my head, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. How can I trust you again? How can I believe anything you say? Each question felt like a dagger piercing through the fragile facade of our relationship. Laura stepped closer, desperation etched in every line of her face. I'll do whatever it takes. We can go to counseling, we can talk about it. Counseling. I interrupted, anger flaring once more. You think talking to a stranger is going to fix this? You've broken my trust in the most profound way. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same again. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched my arm. Please don't say that. I need you to understand that I made a terrible mistake. I want to make it right. The warmth of her touch ignited a flicker of the love I once felt for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the reality of her betrayal. You think I can just forget what you did, that I can pretend everything is fine? I pulled away, the distance between us now feeling insurmountable. I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated, her voice breaking. But I felt so alone, I thought you didn't care anymore. I do care, I replied, my voice softer now, though the hurt was still raw. But you chose to seek comfort with someone else instead of talking to me. You chose to betray me. I know, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was weak. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to try. I love you and I want to make this work. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But the image of her with Jake loomed large in my mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. I need time, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't just jump back into this. I need to think about what I want. She nodded, understanding the weight of my words. I'll give you time. She replied, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and despair. But please don't shut me out completely. As she turned to leave, a wave of sadness washed over me. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I couldn't. The chasm between us felt too wide to bridge. Once she was gone, I sank down onto the couch, my mind racing. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. I couldn't shake the image of Jake from my mind. I had to know more about him. I had to find a way to make him pay. The thought of him stealing my wife from me ignited a fire within me, a burning desire for revenge. I pulled out my phone and began to search for any information I could find about him. I needed to know who he was, what he did, and how I could ensure that he would never come between us again. The idea of revenge began to take root, and I felt a dark sense of purpose wash over me. I would not let this man walk away unscathed. As I scrolled through social media, I found a few pictures, him in his pilot uniform looking every bit the part of the charming rogue. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, and with each passing second, my resolve grew stronger. I would make sure his wings were clipped, and I would do it in a way that would leave no doubt of my intentions. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was just the beginning. My heart was still heavy with betrayal, but the fire of revenge was igniting a new path. I would not be the victim in this story. It was time for me to take control. The days that followed my confrontation with Laura were a blur of anguish and anger. I went through the motions of everyday life, but my mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. The betrayal felt like a wound that refused to heal, and I was determined to make Jake pay for the pain he had caused. I spent hours researching him, gathering every scrap of information I could find. I wanted to know who this man was, what made him tick, and how I could exploit his weaknesses. I learned that he was a first officer for a major airline, a rising star in the industry. He had a charming smile and a reputation for being the life of the party. It made my blood boil just thinking about how he had charmed Laura into his bed. I thought back to the messages I had read. They were filled with flirtation and passion, words that should have been reserved for me. I felt a surge of rage every time I thought about them. I had to act, and I had to act fast. I couldn't let him continue to invade my life, to take what was rightfully mine. As I plotted my revenge, I found myself grappling with a moral dilemma. Part of me was aware that violence or extreme measures would only lead to more pain, but the other part, the part that had been wounded so deeply, craved retribution. I wanted to make him feel the same agony I was experiencing. I wanted him to know that he couldn't just waltz into my life and destroy everything I held dear without consequences. I spent hours on forums and social media, piecing together Jake's life. I learned about his friends, his hobbies, and even his favorite hangouts. Each detail I uncovered fueled my desire for revenge. I imagined scenarios in my mind, each one darker than the last. But I needed to be careful. I had to be strategic. I couldn't afford to act impulsively and ruin my chances of making him pay. One night, as I sat in my dimly lit living room, I stumbled upon a forum for disgruntled airline employees. It was a place where they vented their frustrations, shared stories, and sometimes discussed their personal lives. I realized that this could be my entry point. If I could find a way to infiltrate this community, I could gather information about Jake and possibly find a way to sabotage his career. I created a fake account, adopting a persona that would allow me to blend in seamlessly. I posted about my own experiences as a frustrated airline employee, sharing fabricated stories to gain trust and credibility. It felt surreal, but I was determined to see it through. I spent hours engaging with others, slowly building connections and gathering intel. As I delved deeper into this world, I learned about the inner workings of the airline industry. I discovered that Jake had ambitions of becoming a captain, but there were hurdles he needed to overcome. There were whispers of a recently failed training session, and I seized on that information. If I could exploit that weakness, I could ensure that he wouldn't be flying high for much longer. I began to formulate a plan. I would anonymously report him to the airline's Human Resources Department, citing concerns about his competence and behavior. I would make it sound credible, weaving in just enough truth to make them take notice. It was a calculated risk, but the thought of him facing the consequences of his actions fueled my resolve. But I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't leave a trace back to me. I spent hours drafting the report, ensuring that it was devoid of any personal details that could lead back to me. It was a thrilling yet terrifying process. The adrenaline coursed through my veins as I clicked send, my heart racing at the thought of the repercussions that could follow. Once the report was submitted, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had taken the first step in my plan for revenge. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. I needed to make sure that Jake felt the full weight of my actions, that he understood the pain he had caused. I continued to monitor the forum, gathering more information about Jake and his colleagues. I learned about his relationships with other pilots and how they viewed him. I found out that he had a few enemies, people who were willing to speak out against him if given the right motivation. I knew I could use this to my advantage. With each passing day, my plan began to take shape. I reached out to a few pilots who had shared their grievances about Jake, subtly planting seeds of doubt and concern. I crafted anonymous messages that hinted at his questionable behavior and lack of professionalism. It was a slow burn, but I was determined to watch it unfold. As I sat in my living room, contemplating the next steps, I felt a sense of power I hadn't experienced in a long time. I was no longer the victim, I was the one pulling the strings. I had taken control of my life, and with each calculated move, I felt the weight of betrayal begin to lift, replaced by a dark satisfaction. But even as I reveled in my newfound sense of agency, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind. Was I becoming the monster I was trying to fight against? Would my actions ultimately lead to more pain, not just for Jake, but for Laura as well? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself that this was about justice, about reclaiming what was mine. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. I was ready to see it through to the end. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, my anticipation grew. I was no longer just a husband betrayed. I was a man on a mission. The report I had submitted had generated whispers in the airline community, and I was eager to see how it would unfold. The thrill of revenge coursed through me, igniting a fire that pushed me forward. I was ready to execute the next phase of my plan. I continued to monitor the responses on the forum, checking for any news about Jake. I had created a network of informants, each one unknowingly feeding into my scheme. The more I learned about him, the more I felt empowered. My nights were filled with thoughts of how I could ensure his downfall, and I found myself developing a sense of satisfaction in the meticulousness of my plan. Then, one evening, as I scrolled through the forum, I stumbled upon a post that made my heart race. Someone had mentioned a recent incident involving Jake, a questionable maneuver during a training flight that had raised eyebrows among his peers. This was it. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I immediately reached out to my contacts, subtly probing for more information about the incident. I learned that Jake had almost failed his training due to a serious misjudgment. This was the leverage I needed. I crafted another anonymous message to the airline's HR department, detailing this incident with as much specificity as I could muster. I made it sound like a serious concern, emphasizing that it could endanger passengers' lives. The adrenaline rush was intoxicating as I hit send. My heart raced, a mix of fear and excitement swirling within me. I knew I was crossing a line, but the feeling of power was overwhelming. I had become the architect of Jake's potential downfall, and the thought of him facing the consequences of his actions filled me with a dark sense of satisfaction. As I lay in bed that night, I replayed the events in my mind. I envisioned the HR team receiving my report, their brows furrowing in concern as they reviewed my claims. Would they take it seriously? Would they investigate? I felt a thrill at the thought of his world slowly crumbling around him, the very foundations of his career shaking beneath him. Days passed, and I noticed a change in the atmosphere at home. Laura was trying hard to reconnect, to mend what had been shattered between us. She would ask about my day, initiate conversations, and even suggest activities we could do together. But I was distant, consumed by my plans for revenge. I felt like a ghost in my own home, haunted by the shadows of our past. I couldn't let her see the darkness that was brewing within me. One evening, she sat down beside me on the couch, her eyes searching for connection. "I feel like we're not really together anymore," she said softly, her vulnerability cutting through my resolve. "I'm trying to make things right, but it feels like you're still so angry." Her words struck a nerve. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was angry not just at her, but at the very situation that had unfolded. I was angry at Jake for taking advantage of our cracks, but I couldn't let her see that. I needed to keep my focus on the plan. "I just need time, Laura," I replied, my voice steady but devoid of warmth. "Processing everything, and it's not easy." She nodded, disappointment flickering in her eyes. "I understand. I just hope we can find a way back to each other." As she walked away, I felt a pang of guilt. Part of me wanted to reach out to reassure her, but I couldn't. I had a mission, and I was determined to see it through. The following week, I received a message from one of my informants on the forum. It was a tip-off about an internal investigation into Jake's conduct during training. My heart raced as I read the words. This was happening. My actions were having consequences, and Jake was in the crosshairs. I spent the night packing my apartment, envisioning what this would mean for him. Would he be grounded? Would he lose his job? The thought of him being stripped of his wings filled me with a twisted sense of joy. I could almost hear the whispers of his colleagues, the way they would look at him with pity and disdain. I savored the thought of him facing the consequences of his choices. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice a change in myself. The thrill of revenge that had once consumed me started to morph into something darker. I found myself becoming obsessed with Jake, monitoring his social media and tracking his movements. I knew where he lived, who his friends were, and even what bars he frequented. The line between justice and obsession blurred, and I felt myself teetering on the edge of a precipice. One night, after a few drinks to dull the chaos in my mind, I made a decision. I would confront Jake directly. I needed to see the look on his face when he realized the consequences of his actions. I wanted him to know that I was the one pulling the strings, the one who had orchestrated his downfall. I found out that he would be at a local bar that weekend, celebrating with friends. It was the perfect opportunity. I could confront him, let him know exactly who I was and what he had done. The thought sent chills down my spine, igniting a mix of fear and exhilaration. As I prepared for the confrontation, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I would finally face the man who had invaded my life, the man who had shattered my marriage. I couldn't wait to see the look of shock on his face when he realized that I had been the one behind his misfortunes. The night of the confrontation arrived, and I stood outside the bar, my heart pounding. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I was ready to confront my demons, to face the man who had stolen everything from me. As I pushed through the door, the noise of laughter and chatter enveloped me. I scanned the room, searching for Jake among the crowd. When I finally spotted him, my breath caught in my throat. He was laughing, carefree, surrounded by friends. It infuriated me to see him so happy, so oblivious to the turmoil he had caused. It was time to make my move. I walked toward him, my heart racing and my hands clenched into fists. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, but there was no turning back now. I was ready to face the man who had upended my life. Jake, I called out, my voice cutting through the noise like a knife. As he turned to face me, confusion washed over his features. I could see the moment he recognized me, the shift in his expression from surprise to apprehension. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his bravado wavering. I stepped closer, the anger boiling within me. "I'm the man whose life you've turned upside down," I said, my voice low and menacing. "And I'm here to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." The tension in the air was palpable as I prepared to unleash the full force of my emotions. The moment hung in the air, charged with unspoken words and raw emotion. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to something akin to fear as he took a step back, registering the intensity of my gaze. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a potent mixture of anger and satisfaction. I had come here to confront him, to make him feel the weight of his actions, and now there was no turning back. "Listen, man, I don't know what your problem is," Jake began, attempting to regain his composure. "I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Didn't mean to destroy my marriage. Didn't mean to betray my trust. You think this is just some game?" The anger bubbled up inside me and I felt the urge to lash out. But I forced myself to take a deep breath, to contain the rage that threatened to consume me. He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. "You think you can just waltz into my life, charm my wife, and walk away unscathed? I'm not going to let that happen." People around us had begun to notice the tension, glancing over with curiosity. I could feel their eyes on us, the weight of judgment hanging in the air. I was aware that I was crossing a line, but the need for confrontation was overpowering. I had to make him understand the consequences of his actions. "Look, I didn't mean for it to go this far," Jake said, his bravado fading. "I thought she was single. You thought," I spat. "You didn't think about the damage you were causing, the life you were ripping apart." My voice was a low growl, each word dripping with contempt. He shifted uncomfortably, his friends watching the exchange with a mix of intrigue and concern. I could see the realization dawning on him that I wasn't just some random guy confronting him. I was the husband, the man whose life he had shattered. "Listen, I didn't know," he said again, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this to happen." The words felt empty, hollow. I had heard them before from Laura, and they meant nothing now. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Jake," I replied, my tone cold. "You've taken something from me that I can never get back. You've hurt the one person I loved more than anything." As the confrontation escalated, a part of me wondered if I was going too far. I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and one misstep could send me tumbling into a chasm of regret. But the fire inside me wouldn't let me back down. I needed him to understand. Do you know what it's like to feel utterly betrayed, to watch the person you love turn their back on you? I continued, my voice rising. You've turned my life into a nightmare. Jake opened his mouth, but before he could respond, I took a step back, my mind racing. I could feel the eyes of the crowd on us, the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. I didn't want to become the monster I despised, but the anger was consuming me. I'm not here to fight you, I said, my voice steadier now. I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. I've already reported you to HR. They're investigating your conduct. You're going to pay for what you've done. The color drained from his face, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had taken control, and now he would face the repercussions of his choices. You're lying, he said, shaking his head. You can't do that. I already have, I replied, my voice firm. And I'll make sure that everyone knows what kind of person you are. You think you can hide behind that charming smile. You're about to find out how quickly that can turn into a mask of shame. With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving Jake standing there, his expression a mix of disbelief and fear. As I stepped outside the bar, the cool night air hit my face, and I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I had confronted the man who had invaded my life, and I had taken action. But as I drove home, the exhilaration began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of emptiness. I had achieved my revenge, but at what cost? My marriage was still in tatters, and I was left with the haunting realization that revenge had not healed my wounds. It had only deepened them. When I walked through the door, I found Laura sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her eyes searching mine for answers. What happened? She asked, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, the weight of the confrontation still heavy on my shoulders. I confronted Jake, I replied, my voice steady but devoid of warmth. He knows what he's done, and I've reported him. Her expression shifted, a mixture of relief and fear crossing her features. What does that mean for him? For us, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know, I admitted, my heart heavy with uncertainty. I just couldn't let him get away with it. I needed him to know that his actions have consequences. Laura nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And what about us? What does this mean for our marriage? I paused, my heart aching. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that we could find a way back to each other. But the truth was, I didn't know if we could. The wounds were still fresh, and trust was a fragile thing that could take a lifetime to rebuild. I need time, I finally said, my voice softening. I need to figure out what I want. This has changed everything. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I understand, she said, her voice breaking. I just hope we can find a way back to each other. As I watched her cry, I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. I had fought for my dignity, for my sense of justice, but in doing so, I had left her in pain. The road ahead felt uncertain, and I realized that revenge had not brought me the closure I had hoped for. It had only opened the door to more questions. As I sat down beside her, the silence between us was deafening. We were both lost in our thoughts, two souls adrift in the aftermath of betrayal. I had taken my revenge, but at what cost? The future was uncertain, and as I looked into Laura's tear-stained eyes, I knew we had a long way to go. I had fought for my dignity, but now I had to fight for our marriage if it was even possible. The road to healing would be long and fraught with challenges, but I was willing to try. I owed it to myself, and I owed it to her. As I held her close, I realized that revenge might have given me a temporary sense of satisfaction, but love, true love, was worth fighting for, even in the darkest of times. And so the journey began anew, not just for revenge, but for redemption.